He emerged during the coup carried out by the Iraqi Ba'ath Party, the Revolution of July 17, 1968, which called for the adoption of Arab nationalist ideas, economic urbanization, socialism and secularism, as Saddam Hussein played a major role in the Ba'ath Party coup in 1968, which placed him in the hierarchy of the Ba'ath state as the deputy to the Ba'athist President Major General Ahmed Hussein al-Bakr, and Saddam took control of the government sectors and the conflicting armed forces at a time when many organizations considered capable of overthrowing the government. The Iraqi economy grew rapidly in the 70s as a result of a systematic development policy for Iraq, in addition to the resources resulting from the big boom in oil prices. At that time, Saddam came to power in the Ba'ath state of Iraq, where he became president of the Republic of Iraq and country secretary of the Arab Socialist Ba'ath Party in 1979, after he launched a campaign to liquidate his opponents and opponents within the Ba'ath Party, claiming they betrayed the party. In 1980, Saddam entered the war with Iran, lasted 8 years, from September 22 in 1980 until the war ended with an Iraqi political understanding Iranian August 8, 1988. After the completion, donated Iran 120 Russian-made military aircraft. Before the second anniversary of the end of the war with Iran had passed, Saddam invaded Kuwait and became a threat to the security of the Arab Gulf on August 2, 1990, which led to the outbreak of the Second Gulf War in 1991 AD. After that, Iraq remained under international siege until 2003, when the American armed forces occupied the entire territory of the Iraqi Republic under the pretext that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction and the presence of al-Qaeda elements operating from inside Iraq. He was arrested on December 13 in 2003 in a process called Red Dawn. It took place after his trial because of the crimes he is accused, and executed the death sentence him on December 30 in 2006. Lineage and origin. Saddam Hussein Majid Abd al-Ghaffar Sulayman Abd al-Qadir bin Omar al-Thani al-Rifai, the Emir of Tikrit, was born in the village of Vajah, which lies 23 kilometers from the city of Tikrit, northwest of Baghdad, and belongs to Salah al-Din Governorate, to a family that professes agriculture. His father died 6 months before his birth, and there were many stories that explained the cause of his death, between death of natural causes or his death at the hands of the bandits. Shortly afterwards, Saddam's older brother died at the age of 13, after suffering from cancer. Al-Wajah, 8 kilometers south of Tikrit in north-central Iraq, used to be made of mud-built houses and huts inhabited by people living in poverty. Sanitary water, electricity, and paved roads were not known, and the death rate among children was high, and its inhabitants worked in agriculture. Since there are no schools in Al-Wajah, the able-bodied parents send their children to study in Tikrit. Saddam was born in a house owned by his uncle Karalit Alpha, and he belonged to the Sunni Baijad clan, one of the tribes of the Abu Nasr Husseiniya lineage tribe, which was dominant in the Tikrit region. In the 1930s, the tribe was known for its poverty and propensity for violence, and its leaders took pride in eliminating their enemies for trivial reasons. Saddam's mother Suba was receiving some financial support from her brother Karalit Alpha, who lived in Tikrit and sponsored Saddam's upbringing. In 1979 AD, the Islamic Revolution erupted in Iran and the regime of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi was overthrown, and the Islamists in Iran established an Islamic Republic led by Khomeini. Meanwhile, Iraqi-Iranian disputes escalated, the two countries exchanged the expulsion of ambassadors, and border clashes began between the two countries for 10 months over the disputed right of the Shatt al-Arab waterway. Iraq unilaterally cancelled the 1980 Algeria agreement signed with the Shah of Iran in 1975 on the Shatt al-Arab, and Saddam Hussein declared sovereignty. Iraq for all of its lands and waters. With the intensification of border clashes has Iran in several attacks on border villages between the period of June 13 and 1979 and even another attack aviation on September 4 in 1980. Iraq, after studying the situation and writing to the UN Security Council, did not return the villages that Iran occupied on September 17, 1980. And after that the Iranian bombing escalated to affect entire cities, so the Iraqi response was on September 22, 1980, which separates the two countries. Vxeft Iraqi aircraft Mehrabad Airport near Tehran, Iraqi forces entered the region's rich Khuzestan Iranian oil on September 22 in 1980. In the first days of the war, there was intense fighting on the ground around the strategic ports, and Iraq began an attack on Iranian territory and made great progress until the Iranian forces began to regroup until May 1982, when the Iranian forces were able to regain most of the lands occupied by the Iraqi forces and reached the Iranian-Iraqi borders. Iran is looking for a way to end the war. The war ended in 1988 with heavy material and human losses for both sides. Perhaps the total number of deaths reached 1 million dead on both sides, in addition to the prisoners and the wounded on both sides. Economic losses for both countries were estimated in the hundreds of billions. The countries that were once strong and expanding turned into ruins. Iraq has become a debtor the war costs. This was a great embarrassment for Saddam, who wanted to develop his military might. Saddam, who borrowed from Arab countries, also faced huge sums of money during the 1980s to fight Iran. Has a problem with rebuilding the Iraqi infrastructure, so tried to get financial support again, this time, for the reconstruction of what the war has destroyed. Iraq invasion. In 1998, the U.S. Congress approved a military attack on Iraq because it possesses weapons of mass destruction and because it poses a threat to the region. After former President George W. Bush assumed the presidency, a new era began in which U.S. policy shifted from material aid and logistical support to the Iraqi opposition forces to direct military intervention aligned with Britain. But the events of 11th of September had launched a new era in America and insisted that the U.S. administration to overthrow Saddam Hussein's regime on March 20 in 2003. The Anglo-American forces moved in their quest for what has been called the freedom of Iraq, April 9 in 2003. After the fall of Baghdad. After the fall of Saddam Hussein's regime at the hands of American forces, news of Saddam remained unknown in the first weeks after the fall of the regime and the end of the major operations of the war. Several sightings of Saddam were reported after the war, but none of them was proven. A series of audio recordings attributed to him appeared and were published at various times, but the reliability of these recordings remains in question. He was placed at the top of the wanted list and many of his former regime members were arrested, but efforts to find him were unsuccessful. His sons Uday and Qusay were killed on July 23, 2003, during a violent clash with American forces in Mosul. The civil administrator in Iraq, Paul Bremer, officially announced his arrest. He was arrested, according to U.S. authorities up at 8:30 p.m. Baghdad on December 6 in 2003 on a farm near Tikrit. The operation called Red Dawn after being reported by one of his relatives, citation needed where he was hiding in a remote area. The private doctor denied that Saddam Hussein had any semblance for an important reason, which is that Saddam does not trust anyone and therefore does not even trust him to have a double. As al-Bashir says, according to my information, he did not have any similarities at all, and I did not see any similar to him. If there were any similarities to Saddam, I would surely know that. He has no match for the very simple reason that Saddam does not trust anyone at all. The prison. U.S. military nurse said Saddam Hussein used to water plants in his prison garden and drink coffee while smoking cigars to keep his blood pressure low. He referred to rare glimpses in recent years in Saddam Hussein's life. The nurse was concerned with the former Iraqi president, who called him Victor, during 2004 and 2005 in a camp near Baghdad. And he said it was rare for Saddam to complain during his captivity, and that the orders for him were strict to do everything necessary to keep him alive, and that Colin Lee told me that Saddam should not die while he was under American custody. He said that Saddam was being held in a cell measuring 1.8 meters and 2.4 meters, cot, table and plastic chairs and 2 basins for washing. He said Saddam used to keep breadcrumbs from his food, and when he got out of his cell he would feed the birds as he used to water herbs in the prison garden. He said he was a farmer in his childhood and he never forgot his origin, he added. He didn't cause me any trouble and rarely complained, he added. Saddam was talking about his habit of reading bedtime stories to his young children and how he used to provide medicine to his daughter when she was suffering from stomach pain. Saddam did not talk about death and did not regret his regime, saying that what he did for Iraq, and said that Saddam asked him one day why the American forces invaded Iraq, while the laws were fair and the international inspectors did not find anything. And the 56-year-old military nurse mentioned that he was checking Saddam twice a day and said, "I was not a threat. In fact, I was there to help him and he respected it." And when the nurse had to leave because his brother was dying, Saddam included him, saying he will be his brother. Trial. Saddam and some of his aides were tried for genocide in the Dujail case, and Saddam defended both Najib al-Nuaimi, the former Minister of Justice of the State of Qatar, Ramsey Clark, the former United States Minister of Justice, Iraqi lawyer Khalil al-Jalimi, Lebanese lawyer Bushra al-Khalil, and Jordanian lawyer Issam al-Ghazai. The judges were changed 3 times. Saddam did not initially recognize the court, challenged its legitimacy, and said that the results are known and what is meant is clear, but later he began to defend himself and fully cooperate with the court. On the 5th Sunday of November 2006 AD, Saddam, in presence in the Dujail case, was sentenced to death by hanging to death for crimes against humanity. Saddam Hussein and a number of his associates were tried in another case, which is the planning and implementation of the ANFAL campaign, which killed thousands of Kurds. An Iraqi court had sentenced the 69-year-old Saddam to death by hanging on November 5 for his role in the Dujail case, in which 148 Shiite residents of the Dujail area died in the 1980s, and for crimes against humanity. The court also upheld a death sentence against Barsan al-Takriti, Saddam Hussein's half-brother. Saddam Hussein was sentenced to hanging despite what he had shown during the court sessions regarding his desire to be executed by firing squad in the event of a death sentence. The ruling was well received by the United States, and the European Union has reservations about the death penalty, considering it does not recognize it as a punishment. The Iraqi Court of Cassation said that Saddam's death sentence should be executed within the next 30 days, while the Iraqi presidency said that implementing the death sentence does not require its approval. Saddam's lawyers had launched an appeal within the 30 days following the issuance of the death sentence on November 5, as stipulated in Iraqi law. The ruling relates to events that occurred in the town of Dujail in 1982 AD, in which Saddam Hussein and a number of his aides were accused of causing the killing of 148 residents of that Shiite town after the former president was exposed to an assassination attempt there. Execution. The death sentence was carried out at dawn on Saturday, December 30, 2006, in Baghdad, corresponding to the 10th of Dhu al-Hijjah, corresponding to the first day of Eid al-Adha. The execution took place at the headquarters of the 5th Division in the Kadhimiya area. Burial, memorial and shrine. Saddam was buried in his hometown of Al-Ajah in Salah al-Din Governorate in the city of Tikrit, where the American forces delivered his body to his clan from the governorate, and was buried in what is currently known as Saddam Hussein's mausoleum, and his family and relatives set up mourning councils over him, including his daughter Raghat Saddam Hussein. who paid his memorial in Jordan, where she lives.